You check your account. $182,400. For a second, it feels like something changed, like you finally crossed a line that matters. Then it settles. Nothing actually shifts. The bonus just came in. Bigger than last year, bigger than anything you thought you'd be earning at this stage. A number that would impress people who don't live where you live, people who don't see what it costs to stay here. You run through it automatically. Rent, loans, the quiet inflation of a life that keeps adjusting upward without asking you. By the time you're done, the number is still there, but it doesn't do anything. You close the screen, but it doesn't leave. It follows you. You tell yourself this is progress. You've been telling yourself that for a while now. But something feels off. You think you're moving forward. You're not. You're being positioned. And you don't know for what yet. So you go back to work. Because that's what someone like you does. You don't stop when things feel unclear. You push through it. You stay in motion. You're already inside it. Not halfway. Not on the edge. Inside. The hours don't stand out anymore. They blend. Late night hits aren't events. They're just how the day ends. You stop checking the time because it stops mattering. You optimize everything without thinking about it. How fast you respond, how clean your work is, how little friction you create for the people above you. You learn small things. How to anticipate questions before they're asked. How to fix mistakes before anyone notices them. How to stay invisible while still being necessary. You don't push against the system. You adjust to it, and the system rewards that. Gradually. Then suddenly, your compensation moves. At first, it's incremental, then it jumps. Each increase feels like confirmation, like proof that you're doing it right. So you start tracking it, comparing, projecting. If this keeps going, the future starts to look different. Cleaner, more stable, more yours. You believe that. You believe if you stay long enough, perform well enough, take enough of the pressure without breaking, you'll move up. You believe income reflects your value, that promotions are a signal of real progress, that the system at its core is fair to those who execute. And honestly, everything around you reinforces that idea. The people above you, they were here once. Same hours, same pressure, same structure. They made it through. So you follow. You don't question the path. Because from where you're standing, it looks like the only one that works. But this is where it starts to bend. Not suddenly. Quietly. Almost unnoticeably at first. You think you're building toward power. You're not. You're being placed near it. That's the part no one explains. You don't start with control. You start with proximity. You're in the room. You see the numbers. You understand the mechanics. But none of it is yours. You prepare the materials. Someone else decides what happens with them. You're close enough to feel important. Not close enough to matter. And over time, you start confusing the two. Being present starts to feel like influence. It isn't. Then something else becomes clearer. You've been trained to believe the numbers decide everything. That if the model is right, the outcome follows. But that's not how it plays out. The numbers support the story. They don't create it. By the time you're building the model, the direction is already leaning somewhere. What actually moves things is something you weren't part of. Conversations that happened months ago. Trust built over years. Relationships that never show up in any file you touch. You clean up the logic. You sharpen the output. But the decision? That came from somewhere else. You're just making it defensible. And then there's the part that takes longer to accept. You're trading time for money. You tell yourself that's temporary, that it leads somewhere else. But structurally, that's still where you are. Labor. Replaceable. Optimizable. No matter how efficient you become, you're still operating underneath something larger. Something that doesn't earn money. It directs. And that difference is bigger than it looks. Because the one who allocates capital doesn't need to optimize time the way you do. They operate on a different axis. You feel this before you fully understand it. Something doesn't line up. Because everything you were taught suggested effort leads to control. But here, effort leads to access. Nothing more. And when you move forward, that doesn't disappear. It just changes form. You start at the edge. You build models late into the night. You see transactions before they exist publicly, before they hit the news, before anyone outside the building even knows they're happening. There's something real about that. You're closer than almost anyone you know. You see how things actually move. But you still don't have a voice. Your time isn't yours anymore. It's scheduled, fragmented, assigned. You don't decide when you stop. You decide how long you can keep going. And the work you produce? It moves. Upward. Through layers you don't control. It gets adjusted, reframed, presented. And somewhere along the way, it stops being yours. You don't even think about that anymore. Because you're too deep in it. The exhaustion fades into the background. The isolation, too. You stop calling it either. It's just normal now. And the proximity keeps you there. Because it feels like you're getting closer to something, even if you can't define what that is. Then your role changes. You're not building everything from scratch anymore. You're reviewing, correcting, refining. The workload shifts slightly. The pressure doesn't. Your income increases again and again. It feels like progress. But the structure doesn't move. You're just in a different position inside it. You sit in more conversations now. You hear how things are framed, how decisions are justified. And slowly, something becomes obvious. You're not there to win the deal. You're there to support the people who do. You're part of the system that enables it, not the part that controls it. The center of gravity isn't where you thought it was. It never was there. You were just facing the wrong direction. Then you move again. Now you're responsible for making things happen. Execution, deadlines, coordination. Everything needs to close. And if it doesn't, it's on you. You start solving problems faster, cleaner, without needing direction. People begin to rely on you. Not because of your title, because of your consistency. And that consistency turns into something else. Leverage. Not visible, but real. People call you because you get things done. Because you don't slow things down. Because you understand the moving parts. But even here, you're still not deciding where things go. You're making sure they get there. You start to notice a pattern. Not in the tasks, not in the titles. In the limits. Every time you move up, something improves. The compensation, the access, the environment. But something else tightens. A new dependency, a new pressure, a new form of exposure you didn't have before. And it doesn't stop. It just reshapes. You tell yourself you're progressing because the surface keeps changing. The numbers go up, the conversations shift, the rooms get quieter, more controlled. But underneath that, the structure stays intact. You're still inside something, still reacting to it, still adapting to it, just at a different level. You optimize what you were taught to optimize. It feels rational. You push for a higher salary. You refine your performance. You aim for the next promotion. Each step is rewarded. Each step is validated. And each step keeps you in place. Because none of those things actually change your position. They just improve your condition within it. You get more comfortable, more efficient, more recognized. But not more free. You're still dependent on what flows into your layer, still waiting for opportunities to appear before you can act. And you call that forward movement. It isn't. The direction was never about those metrics. Access changes what you see. Capital changes what you can do. Structure changes what happens, even when you're not there. Those are the variables that move outcomes. Not your performance, not your income, not your promotion speed. You can optimize all three perfectly and still stay contained. Because the system doesn't reward effort. It rewards placement, where you sit relative to the flow. And every time you rise, you're not breaking out. You're exchanging one constraint for another. The surface improves. The mechanics don't. You don't escape. You reposition. That's why it never feels complete. Because it isn't. The problem was never that you weren't doing enough. So you work harder. It's the obvious move. More hours, more output, less margin for error. You become sharper, faster, more reliable. You assume this compounds into leverage. It doesn't. It buys you entry. It keeps you inside. It lets you stay in the room longer than most people can. But it doesn't give you control over what happens inside that room. The people above you aren't there because they worked more hours. They're there because something's shifted in their position. And that shift doesn't come from effort alone. It never did. So you save. You accumulate. You track every increase with precision. It feels responsible. Disciplined. Correct. At your level, it works. At higher levels, it fades. Because the scale changes faster than you do. When decisions move hundreds of millions, sometimes billions, your personal savings stop being relevant. Not because they're small, because they're disconnected. The capital that matters isn't stored. It's deployed, directed, positioned into places that generate outcomes beyond individual effort. And if you're not the one directing it, you're not influencing anything at that scale. You're participating, not shaping. So you climb, naturally, one level at a time, one title after another. You assume the path leads somewhere different, somewhere freer. It doesn't. It leads deeper. The ladder isn't designed to release you. It's designed to organize you. Each level filters people into more specific roles, more defined functions, more precise placements. You don't break out. You get refined. And the higher you go, the more exact that placement becomes. You followed everything correctly. That's why you got here. But that was never the question. The path worked exactly as intended, which is why it leads exactly where it does. And nowhere else. Then something shifts again. Not outside. Inside how you see it. At the highest levels, things start to simplify. Not easier, just clearer. You stop chasing increases. They lose meaning. You stop tracking titles. They stop defining anything important. Because neither of those things determine your position anymore. What matters is where you sit relative to the flow of capital. Whether you react to it or direct it. Whether you depend on it or structure it. Everything else starts to fade. The noise, the comparisons, the constant measurement, those belong to earlier layers. You don't need them here because the system itself becomes visible. You start to see how decisions form before they appear. How capital moves before anyone talks about it. How structures shape outcomes long before execution begins. You're not focused on what you earn anymore. You're focused on what you influence. Quietly. Indirectly. Structurally. Where the result doesn't require your presence. Only your position. That's where the difference is. Not in the number attached to your name, but in where you exist inside everything that moves. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. If you want to go further into that layer, to understand how capital actually moves behind closed doors, before it ever becomes visible, subscribe, because this is only the surface.